Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Minnesota chapter of ARCS webinar on the State of Science 2020 Pandemic Pulse. We're pleased to welcome so many of you from Minnesota. In addition, we welcome a national audience of ARCS members, ARCS scholars, and friends from all over the country. I'm Judy Benham, one of the co-chairs of the Minnesota chapter of the ARCS Foundation. Before beginning, there are a few housekeeping details to mention. Be aware that all of your microphones are on mute. Instead of asking questions directly, please post your questions to the questions section in the webinar control panel at any time during the presentation. We'll try to get to as many of your questions as possible during the Q&A period after the talk. Next slide, please. ARCS Foundation stands for Achievement Rewards for College Scientists. We're a group of women with chapters across the company who want to boost American leadership in science and technology. Our impact has been high at the national level with the 15 chapters we have over the 60 years that we've been in business. We do this by investing in outstanding US citizens and providing funding for people to complete degrees in science, engineering, and medical research. Over the 60 years, we've provided over $120 million in funding to 11,000 plus students in the various chapters of the organization. And the 15 chapters have sponsored many talented and motivated US citizens. Next slide, please. This year in 2020, ARCS National conducted a survey of our alumni to find out about the impact of the Scholar Award for them. As you can see from this slide, that over 90% of them found that the ARCS Award helped them make significant importance to them as a student, was important for moral support and encouragement because of the mentoring that's available, important for prestigious recognition. And you can see that they also found that it was important for focusing more time on their research and being able to complete their degrees. Next slide, please. This slide shows the input from our alumni on their impact on science. It's a self-respondent poll in terms of the number of them that are doing these various things as professionals now. And you can see that we have over 50% of them are mentoring future scientists. Over 40% are discovering and making innovations. And you can see that they're also communicating at the national level on scientific competitiveness, as well as founding a leading organization that has a significant scientific or economic impact. Next slide. I'd like to switch now and talk just a little bit about the Minnesota chapter of ARCS. Next slide, please. We were established in 2009, and in the 11 years that we've been in existence, we've awarded over $225,000 to 24 graduate students at the University of Minnesota. Our scholars receive $5,000 per year for 2 years, and the funds are unrestricted in terms of how the scholar chooses to use the money. All of the contributions to the ARCS Scholar Award Fund go directly to the students. Next slide. We have worked very hard to advance science in Minnesota, engaging the scholars and the scholar alumni. We are one of the few chapters that has alumni that have stayed in the Minnesota area, and they are now members of our chapter. We work to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. We also work to provide outreach information about science to the community, including the fact that some of our scholars provide direct outreach and work with individuals in K through 12 grade level applications. So we have been expanding our scholar base of support this year. 3M has provided 3 scholar awards. So this year we have 6 scholars in our cohort. Next slide. Now I'd like to take the pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker tonight. That's Jay Shri Seth from 3M. She was appointed 3M's first ever Chief Science Advocate in 2018 and is using her scientific knowledge, technical expertise, and professional experience to advance science and communicate the importance and benefits of science in everyday life. Jayshree is a corporate scientist at 3M and leads applied technology development for industrial adhesives and tapes division. She has a PhD in chemical engineering from Clarkson University and holds 70 patents for a variety of innovations. In 2019, she was inducted into the Carleton Society at 3M, which is the science honorary society for individuals of high contribution, usually responsible for key technologies that has been used for wide impact in the company. She recently was also awarded the Society of Women Engineers, known as SWE, S-W-E, Highest Achievement Award for her visionary, sustainability-focused contributions to adhesives, release, and fastener technologies, for creating, championing, and teaching new technologies for product and technology development, and for deeply influential STEM advocacy. Recently, she became the author of the upcoming book, which has just been released, The Heart of Science, Engineering Footprints, Fingerprints, and Imprints, published by the Society of Women Engineers. This sales proceeds from this book go directly to a scholarship that she's established for women of color in STEM. And on the personal side, Jayshree has 2 adult children and her husband, who also works at 3M. Now, as we transition into her presentation, we'd like to begin with a brief video that talks about the 3M State of Science Index.
Hi, my name is Jayshree Seth, and I'm a scientist at 3M. Science matters to us at 3M. It's very important, but we wanted to understand what the world thought about science. So we did a global survey called the State of Science Index, and what we found is that people really don't appreciate or acknowledge science in their everyday lives. We found that 4 out of 10, 38%, said that if science didn't exist, their lives wouldn't be any different. That is shocking. So it's very clear that we need to champion and advocate for science. So I'm essentially raising the awareness, acknowledgement, and appreciation of science. I'm also trying to address some of the barriers, boundaries, and biases that exist, and then trying to champion and communicate in a context that is important to people. The depiction of scientists in the popular culture has a major negative impact on how science is perceived and how scientists are perceived. Media portrayals are of evil scientists, mad scientists, genius scientists. My daughter wants to be a cool scientist. If you portray scientists in this negative light, then science perhaps also is viewed in a negative light. In fact, we found that people want to know more about science. They also said they would like to hear about science from scientists, but they find scientists unapproachable. They almost find them to be elitist. And that is why it is important for us to show the person behind the science.
I really enjoy dancing.
I play ultimate frisbee.
I have 3 kids.
I'm really into community.
I've always been interested in music.
You know, media often shows scientists as people in white coats and mixing colored fluids in beakers. We need to dispel the notion that scientists are unapproachable by going beyond the beaker.
So thank you, Judy, Ingrid, and the organizing team for this opportunity. I'm back. So you may see the date of May 4th. And so for those of you who heard me in May, I'm presenting virtually again. And seriously, as bad as it sounds, this is the new normal for a while yet. Here we are, November. These continue to be unprecedented times. So let's address that first. The way I like to say it is that 2020 makes the VUCA world of yesterday look tame and manageable. VUCA, as some of you may know, is a term borrowed from the military, and it's often used to describe the business world as well. You know, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. We use CA. But in 2020, the discussion of vulnerability has completely eclipsed any discussion of volatility. Vulnerability, not just of our health, but of communities, companies, countries, has been exposed. And of course, we've already established that this is a truly unprecedented in its wide-ranging impact, no question there. But complex has also given way to contentious. All subjects are deemed controversial, and instead of being discussed, they are being disputed. And then every action, the words, and the abundant rhetoric just gets amplified, constantly leading to additional challenges. So it's really a new level of VUCA world out there. So this is my version of what I thought happened in 2020. Here we are, virtually all of humanity facing the same existential crisis. We are all confronting the same fears, and we all await the same gift of science. There is no doubt in my mind science will vanquish this pandemic. We heard some more good news on that front today. But during this strange infinite present that we are living through, this punctuated equilibrium, if you will, what a great opportunity to study what the general public thinks about science. So I guess my first question to engage you is, what do you think about what the general public thinks about science? Are they seeing it in more of a positive light or negative light? Have things changed or not? So that's a good question, right? Because in fact, it is very tricky. And as we were doing the survey, you could convince yourself to go either way. So it's kind of interesting to see what happened. We tested the hypothesis, and science is actually having a moment. And that is exactly why it is a great time to advocate for science and STEM equity. So let me explain what is going on. Science skepticism declined for the first time since we started tracking it 3 years ago. And as you can see, it was steadily rising till before the pandemic, but during the pandemic, it is down. And trust in science and scientists is the highest it has been. So now, as a very science-minded audience, you're probably thinking, good to know that science is being seen in a positive light. And you have all these questions, including, wait a minute, why is 3M doing these surveys? So for those who didn't hear me in May, I checked with Judy and the organizing team, and we discussed that maybe it's good to give a little bit of background if you haven't heard the background before. So this is our sustainability framework at 3M. And I go to work every day. My projects relate to science for circular, science for climate, and science for community. So we are committed to creating a more positive world with science, and we work towards the sustainability development goals. And we've always had a long-standing commitment to education and STEM equity in all the communities that we operate in. Judy just mentioned about the ARCS scholars. Even for K-12, just last year, we spent $41 million in a variety of initiatives across the spectrum. And this year, actually, we announced a $50 million fund for social justice, and a key element there as well is STEM equity. Less than a third of STEM roles are held by women. We need all the diversity of thoughts and experiences we can get in order to creatively solve the problems we face to unlock the secrets to a sustainable future. We know that STEM professionals and academics have a huge influence on shaping the world. It's not just women. Only 3% of all the scientists and engineers in the US are Black men, and just 2% are Black women, according to a NSF study. So we have a lot of room for improvement on the STEM equity front because it has a wide-ranging impact, and including that on the talent pipeline of companies like 3M. Excuse me. We're about science at 3M. It's our most distinguishing characteristic. It's what ties our businesses together. It's the foundational strength behind our brand. Science applied to life. We care about science. Science matters to us, and we wanted to understand what the global perception around science was. And we didn't find any studies that were relatively recent and global in nature. So we actually commissioned one. We surveyed 14 countries in late 2017. That's when we started, and 1,000 respondents per country. And the results have been really interesting, and let's just say very thought-provoking. And you heard some of that in the video where I didn't have makeup. I just realized what a difference makeup makes. And that's the beauty of science also. So every time I speak, I get the same sensation when I present this data, which is that 4 out of 10 surveyed globally said if science didn't exist, their lives would be no different. You heard us right. If science didn't exist, their life wouldn't be no different. That's 4 out of 10. And 32% of the people call themselves science skeptics. And in this population, 6 out of 10 said if science didn't exist, their lives would be no different. Now, get this. They're taking their survey on their laptops or mobile phones. So yes, you can pick up your jaw off the floor. It's very clear that science is invisible, science is underappreciated, and science is taken for granted. That is the real problem. People don't realize that all this wonderful technology that they so seem to enjoy the benefits of, their cars, their microwaves, their coffee machines first thing in the morning, all that has fundamental science and research and application that has allowed them to afford these benefits. Some of the other things that people around the globe say. I was more excited about science as a child. Many even said that as an adult, I don't think there's any need for me to understand science. 36% of those surveyed said only geniuses can have a career in science, and this number hasn't really changed over the years. So thank you, Albert Einstein, but no thanks, because who do you think? Who do you think a label like this, a label of genius, deters the most? It's exactly those who are underrepresented in many STEM fields. And no surprise that across the globe, women trailed in the positive sentiment for science. In fact, this audience will appreciate this data point. When asked if you could have a satisfying career in engineering, 25% of the men agreed, but for women, it was only 9%. And here I am, an engineer, certainly not a genius by any means, with a satisfying career in STEM, so we have a lot of work ahead of us. So these are just some of the results I'm sharing, and there's a lot more there, but it was clear that science needs advocates, science needs more champions, and it was clear that this is not some data we can keep close to our vest at 3M. This needs to be shared, and we need to foster a global conversation around this topic. And so I was called upon to be the company's first ever chief science advocate. And just like I spoke in the video, as an engineer, I just broke it down into three aspects of this. A is just about raising awareness and appreciation and acknowledgement of science so we can move people from this sort of apathy, because science is just in the background for them. Second area is, of course, breaking down biases, boundaries, barriers, and beliefs. I'm not a genius, I can't do science, I'm a girl, science is not for me. All those are issues, right? And the portrayal of science in the media that I talked about. And I've seen that happen. Despite having 2 PhD scientists at home, my daughter said, I don't want to do science, it's for geeks. So that image of, nerds and loners and mavericks and evil and genius, in the media is not going to inspire little girls. So we have to address that. And finally, we have to focus on the context and champion and communicate that scientists solve problems and science improves lives. I know from my own experiences how important context was to my daughter, whereas the content was sufficient to motivate my son. So it's important that we talk about the context of science, not just what it is about, as in terms of the content. Oh, and that's me again. See, so I ain't lying when I say it's the science of makeup and lighting. And I own this image because it impressed my daughter and she thought I was finally the cool scientist. So, hey, whatever works. She doesn't approve my lockdown look at all. So now I just shared some of the results. We just don't have time, but you can access this website and see the results from 2018, 2019, and 2020. And basically in 2019, we just dug deeper into the somewhat shocking results, What we found is that people do realize that science is important based on how you asked, and they realize it's important for our future. But they really do believe that scientists need to communicate in a way that is more understandable. So just as I suspected, a focus on the context and telling a story, not just rattling off facts and evidence and data, that works well perhaps within the peer group, but certainly not for the public. And many also thought that scientists are elitist. So as practitioners, it is our responsibility to work on that image as well. And that's exactly why we developed that Beyond the Beaker series, to dispel this myth about who scientists are. They're like everyday ordinary people. So that brings me to what we have been doing since we got those results. And again, I'm just giving you a sampling here. We compiled the Scientists as Storytellers Guide, and that has tips from many known, SciComm folks. We have Alan Alda, Scott Kelly, Katie Couric, and they just talk about powerful concepts as it relates to science communication. And that's actually me and Janet in the lab holding up one of my favorite tape products we developed. This guide is downloadable. It's on the 3M website, so check it out. We also hosted a podcast series, and here we just picked apart the survey results and discussed the why and the how and the what to do about all the aspects of the survey, with scientists and educators and inventors and innovators. And then we did the video series that you just saw, the Beyond the Beaker, where we profiled diverse 3M scientists as everyday people with the same interests and hopes and desires. And we had to do that because of the data unearthed by the State of Science Index. And then I speak at a lot of events to take this message to the world. We share the results of the survey. We also pull in celebrities to amplify the message, and we focus on women and underrepresented minorities. This year, we also created Science at Home series, where we have diverse 3M scientists doing simple science experiments to keep kids engaged. We even actually had Camille Schreier, who's Miss America, do a elephant toothpaste science experiment for us. So we pulled in celebrities into this as well. And these just follow the next generation science standards. And you can do them simply with, like my experiment was vinegar and baking soda. So very straightforward, blowing up the balloon and things. Because science is going to be very difficult to do if you're not hands-on and engaged and in the remote learning environment. We just wanted to do something to help. And then I write a lot. So please follow me on LinkedIn. And if the message resonates with you, please help us to amplify it, because that's the only way to get the word out. I write about topics such as science advocacy. And what I've learned is that we need to make that connection of science to everyday life to keep it in the forefront. Otherwise, it's taken for granted, as the results showed. We also need to make science feel more of a human endeavor as opposed to some strange, ivory tower thing, because we really can't have that chasm with the general public. We can't have that elitist view, because it'll be an issue when we need the public to follow science. And we have seen exactly how that has played out now. And finally, it is important to keep talking about STEM and encouraging more and more mainstream exposure and education of STEM. And then I also talk about the multifaceted issues of girls in STEM and women in STEM across the spectrum, social conditioning to early education to STEM in college, all the way to retaining STEM professionals and the leaky pipeline issue. We need more role models. We need to change the way it's taught. We need to communicate that it solves problems, that you can really help with a communal mindset and help others. So the way I like to say it is that it's time for steam cleaning. S is for shattering the stereotypes. T is for really telling the wholesome story. E is for providing exposure in our environment. A is for allies and advocates. We need men and boys to be allies here. It is not a zero-sum game. We will all benefit from it. And finally, M is for metrics and measures. Listen, without that, unfortunately, numbers just don't move, especially in many corporate and institutional environments. So it's great if leaders put actual metrics and measures to move the needle on that. And on the note of survival, here we are, 2020, and you're probably thinking, so what did we find out in our 2020 results? So we did the survey, and the results came in right before the pandemic. And after the pandemic, the world as we know it certainly changed, let's just say, in so many ways. And it was just a unique opportunity to get a pulse during the pandemic. So in 2020, we actually released 2 sets of results. One is before the pandemic, and a pandemic pulse that was taken during the pandemic. And we already talked about the first theme, that skepticism is down and trust is up. Basically, the image of science is on the rise in 2020. We also see that after healthcare, people want science to address the environmental sustainability challenges. It continues to remain top of mind for them. 2 other themes that emerged and perhaps brought into focus by what is happening around the world on the topic of social justice and inequity, especially in the US, as I'll show in a minute, catalyzed and crystallized in the US, perhaps due to the raw and revealing events that unfolded, and unmasked the pervasive nature of the virus that is systemic racism, not to mention the disproportionate impact of coronavirus on communities of color. And finally, people want to address those issues. They understand that for advancement and acceleration and adaptation and adoption of science-based solution, we need STEM equity. I've seen so much discussion around vaccine trials and all of that, requiring more than just one race, so that we can have a very equitable analysis of what's going on as we deliver the vaccine. So people want everyone to step up: government, academia, corporations. Among some other results, the world says we should follow scientific advice to contain the spread of COVID-19. This is the global number. If you're wondering what it was in the US, it was 90%. And so regardless of what people may be expressing in social media and other places, this was very confidence inspiring that the world is united in their view. And they believe that there are negative consequences to society if people do not value science. And this jumped up among the emerging markets for sure. So we are definitely seeing people beginning to value science more as the role of science has played out during the pandemic on the world stage, with scientists pushed in the forefront. As far as credible sources for scientific information, it was very good to see the Mostly Believe has scientists and some people working in scientific fields. In the mixed section, it is company websites and others, and Mostly Skeptical is a social media politician. So this was good to see, honestly. I've been very worried about the infodemic. My mom's always sending me stuff from India on WhatsApp, and I have to tell her, do not forward this, just delete it. This makes no sense. There is no such thing. So there has been really morally reprehensible, actions from people who are just putting stuff out there, which is just not reliable. But it's very interesting to see that people are skeptical of that information. So great to hear that. And risk of health issues, of course, are top of mind. If we don't follow science, we will have a negative consequence as far as our health is concerned. The next one is environmental impact, and then people also recognize there'll be an economic impact. So this is top of mind, health issues. And it's always been that, I should point out, in the State of Science Index. And again, we see that healthcare is on the top, but of course, this time it's find a cure for emerging viruses. And so that's first. Second is cure for ongoing diseases. And then interesting to see that social justice and STEM equity and underrepresented minorities is actually edging out even climate change in this particular question. So amid this major public health challenge, top issues that people want to solve include that of social justice and STEM equity. And the importance of STEM education. 74% say that, yeah, I agree. I'm more likely to agree now that people should pursue STEM related careers to benefit society's future. People have seen the impact that PPE has, the fact that you need mechanical engineers and designers and industrial engineers to pull together all these ventilators and stuff, and all the research that goes on for drug therapies, and it has all played out near and dear to people while they're locked down watching the news, and that has resulted in this blip and moving upwards. Now, nobody wanted a global crisis to amplify the role of science, but it has certainly done that, and that is why it's a great opportunity for us to sort of act now and bolster the public image and build confidence. The sad news is that many students are being discouraged from pursuing science, and interestingly, they are among the younger generation. So that is certainly a cause for concern. And when you dig deeper and ask why that is, a lack of access to science classes in my school, and this, when you actually slice and dice the data, you see that that's the data point from underdeveloped and emerging economies, is that I don't have access to quality STEM education. In the US, highest as far as inequalities related to gender, race, and ethnicity. So this is really problematic to see. And I think this is something that has really put US on the map in not a good way, because it was certainly highest in our country. And then if you ask how you inspire more students to pursue science, people have the answer. They got it right. Teach it in a more engaging way. Show how it helps make the world a better place. Demonstrate the different career opportunities in science. So it really, the role of science communication and talking about our field suddenly becomes more important, especially when sometimes media hijacks our pursuits and shows them in an evil or a maverick or a genius or a loner kind of way. So I think part of our responsibilities is not just to do science, but to talk about science in all these ways. And then, of course, the responsibility for the teachers to also do similar things to engage the students. Interestingly, corporations have a license to lead. People are expecting corporations all to step up. It's not just that government should be doing it. And interestingly, the younger generation, not surprisingly though, interestingly but not surprisingly, the younger generation wants companies to step up. They want to know if you're doing something to address racial inequality, if you're creating new jobs for underrepresented minority groups. So we've all seen the outpouring of support and money and emphasis on this area, and it helps, and it's also because everybody is under that magnifying lens if you're doing anything or not. And so whatever drives that activity is a good thing. People do absolutely care about that equity. So after I looked at the results, the way I like to say it is 2020 is the year to stem skepticism. And it's the year to really advocate for science and STEM equity because people are primed. They seem ready and willing to do something about it, especially as these 4 key relationships in my mind have become evident as a result of our 2020 results. First, I like to call it the science of health for the health of science. Think about it. The science of health for the health of science, because we have clearly seen how we brought science into prominence, and it was this pandemic that did it. So with healthcare, in many ways, science gets personal, and our inherent interest in our own health provides a way in to attract people to science more generally. And I think it provides a very good strategy for educating people and build a ongoing healthy relationship with the scientific process. You know, the fact that it is dynamic, the process relies on new data, the process relies on debate and discourse and discussion, and that's just how it works. And it's important so that people cannot politicize it easily. We all saw it happen, and it was horrendous to watch. But if we educated people on the whole process and the scientific method, people would say, but yeah, that's how it happens. And it's a good thing that it happens this way, that we actually debate it and we actually change our minds as new data becomes available. Second is the technology and sociology of trust revelations that we had. So we already talked about the infodemic, and that really risks undermining trust. And what we found is that while technology has given people access to all this information, they are mostly skeptical of social media. So this is good news. Trust in scientists is the highest, and even corporations is high. So there's a clear opportunity for science and scientists and science-based companies to be visible, to be accessible, active in their advocacy to bolster that foundation of public trust in science. The third I like to say is engineering of sustainable solutions. Now, during the pandemic, we all saw images of nature thriving as humans took a pause. You know, I saw pics on my WhatsApp groups from India showing how they could finally see the Himalayas from Jalandhar. We saw, I think it was dolphins in the Venice Canal, you know, and things like that. So it's not surprising. So outside of healthcare, environmental impact remains a top concern. Now is not the time to put sustainable solutions on the back burner. We have to show the critical role of science in solving these challenges. And it also gives a unique opportunity to attract underrepresented minorities to STEM and build a sustainable talent solution, given that they have a higher affinity to communal and pro-social goals. And this is a very well researched and documented fact that underrepresented minorities have a more of an affinity to pro-social goals. I actually discussed this with Professor Amanda Diekman at Indiana University, because I found all her papers that show that underrepresented minority kids always want to do good by their community and have pro-social goals. So this is truly a win-win. The world needs more sustainable solution. The world needs to become a better place as far as that is concerned, health and sustainability. And there are kids who are going to be so much more attracted towards these pro-social goals. So we have to engineer the sustainable solutions for sustainability as far as environment is concerned, as well as our talent pipeline. And finally, the math of equality and accountability. I'd like to say that there's a multiplier effect when everyone comes together to solve common goals. And the world is now more likely to agree that science needs more funding due to the pandemic. And our surveys shows that people hold governments responsible for societal issues, but they also know that health, sustainability, and STEM equity, they want everybody else to step in. And the most positive impact likely happens with a shared responsibility when scientists and governments and business leaders and NGOs and academic institutions and individuals pull together. So it's another call to action to show that the pro-social science relies on the additive power for the greater good by strengthening partnerships and bolstering that STEM ecosystem. So The pandemic pulse really has given science a lifeline of support, and now is the time to double down on our efforts to stem skepticism, advocate for science and inclusive innovation with a focus on STEM equity. And these messages really resonate with me. I already told you that, I guess I didn't tell you this. I didn't think myself as a science and engineering type. I just wanted to help people improve lives and make the world a better place. And I naturally gravitated to fields where this contextual pull was strong. And I frankly did not see that in STEM fields. And I ended up here, but I made this communal mindset really the cornerstone of my success, because without that, what I feel is what psychologists call communal goal incongruity. And it's interesting, the more I talk to women, the more I find out how much it resonates with so many of them. So I really think we have to make it more visible and lean into it, and that is good for all. In fact, I don't know how many of you probably weren't, part of the May one, but you might have in May, June, July seen ads on TV, 3M ads, and I'm in 3 of those. And I essentially brought my story in those ads, and I wanted to talk about the fact that how my pursuit in science has been more about working together collaboratively to improve lives, building on ideas, working in teams, empathy for the end user, and science is a journey, not a genius aha moment. And for each one of those, I essentially wanted to make sure I'm appealing to girls and underrepresented minorities, because I do believe that many think this way. And so this is a great opportunity for us, because we really need to drive for STEM equity. I do not believe we can solve the problems we had ahead of us by having just a monolithic group go at it. And today I'm at the highest level at 3M, the 4th woman to ever achieve this level. And I want to say I am the science and engineering type. I want my type to become the science and engineering type. So I think it's a responsibility that I feel, and many feel that as I go around the world and talk to people. So it's very important that we communicate science so much, not in the agentic goals it allows you to achieve, but also the communal goals. And that's sort of my my spiel. So what's the real shtick? I did give you my spiel. The real shtick is STEM. Science, humanities, technology, engineering, and math. And this is very important when virtually half of the world will only trust science that aligns with their beliefs. Science is not a belief system. And the only way to get us out of a trust paradox type situation is to advocate for science with a human context and promote STEM equity. And people know that as individuals, we have a strong role to play to step up and address the inequities. So if you look at this, equal access to quality STEM education, who has responsibility for that? 60% government, non-government 38%. Climate change, again, more government than non-government. But look at racial inequality. Very interesting, isn't it, that people want individuals to step up. So I would like to close with my own attempt of making hashtag 2020 count. I compiled all my writings in this book that was launched last week, as Judy mentioned, The Heart of Science, Engineering Footprints, Fingerprints, and Imprints. And all proceeds from the sales of my book will go to a scholarship for underrepresented minority women in STEM, and it'll be administered by the Society of Women Engineers. So I hope what I said resonates. And I also hope you will buy the book and support the cause and start a new chapter in someone else's life. Thank you so much.
Jay Shri, it's Ingrid. Thank you so much. That was really, really an interesting follow-up to what you presented earlier in the year. I think you mentioned that you perhaps weren't surprised at the change in opinion of science. Was there anything from the survey that you were really clearly surprised about?
Actually, to be honest, Ingrid, we were really wondering which way this is going to go. Now, think about it. This was done in the June, July timeframe.
Mm-hmm.
And the way science was being talked about was up and down constantly. And we would discuss, oh my gosh, what if it happens saying that, science, bad, bad, naughty, naughty, then what? And then we would say, no, I think people will recognize that this is going to go up. So I'll honestly say that I was relieved. How about that? I was relieved that it went up. It was a little ray of sunshine during those dark months, and that did not surprise us. What surprised me the most is how much importance people are placing on non-government things, where many countries I would have thought would have put a lot more onus on the government. So I think this is also perhaps a commentary on what was going on in all these different countries and how people are realizing that they may need to step up and be part of the solution. So that was actually, it was interesting to see that. I was also, I'd say, surprised a little bit, because when I saw the global numbers that 92% of the world wants to follow science, I was like, okay, that's fine, but tell me the US number. And they were like, 90%. Because that's not what I hear on the news, right? If you turn the news on. So it was very interesting. So we are very complex as human beings, and I don't know what goes on in our head, and it's a very fluid concept, but and our data is very representative. So it's not like we just went somewhere where everybody would say, yeah, it's going to be science. So I think lots of stuff in there, which is, I would say, food for thought, not truly surprising, because you could go either way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Good. So as I hear you speak about advocating for science, I think of each of us as individuals. And do you have any recommendations for us as individuals on specific things we can do to advocate for science?
Yeah, a lot actually. Chapter 1 of the book. So I would highly recommend that people buy. It's a great stocking stuffer, even if you want to gift yourself. How about that? It's all for
I
a good
ordered
cause.
mine today, so good. Okay.
Yeah, so the way I like to say it is many ways. So one of the articles I talk about is think about STEM. Think about STEM as in sponsors, teachers, educators, and mentors. So step up and help them. Just simply that. Remember all these people who are in the background of what needs to happen in the STEM ecosystem. Then I also talk about exposure, engagement, education, and what am I missing? Exposure, education, and environment. So many kids don't even know what a scientist does. The most interesting story that I ever heard was through the Denise Rutherford. She's the on the board of Starbase. So Starbase visited, and one of the teachers there told me that when they saw a picture of a woman with a child, and she said, she's not a scientist, right? She said, no, she's a scientist. You can have kids as scientists? Like, a sixth grader didn't even know that scientist is a profession where you can actually have kids and stuff like that. So I was just shocked as to how little people know in some communities. So I think just that exposure is important. And then inculcating curiosity in kids, asking questions and engaging with them, helping the education and sponsoring. So that's another one. Then the last one I want to bring up is what I call giving your voice. V is for volunteering, O is for organizing, I is for inspiring, C is for championing, and E is for, what was E? How can I forget? Engaging, I think it was. So this is where I give examples of things that you can actually do. A lot of communities don't even have like simple science fairs and things like that. So that's one thing we can certainly help with. And they are always looking for volunteers. So volunteers is a very important thing. And if you just go to any science organization in your community, you'll find out how much help they need, just to do simple things. And so that's a really, really important one. For organizing, I say, just taking somebody who works at 3M and, go to human resources or philanthropy teams in your company and just organizing mentorship programs with local nonprofits, and corporate matching can be done to channel resources to increase the opportunities. We do that at 3M all the time. So just emailing the teacher and proactively asking them if they need anyone to organize anything like that. And then just call up your friend and say, hey, you're a scientist, I want you to go do this. And then inspiring is more about showing kids how science solves problems. It's important to communicate how science works, and the context is very important for kids to see. And talk to them about the failures we encounter, because if we don't acknowledge the ups and downs, they will not know the scientific process. And so we really need to inspire resilience, because we can become a society where nobody wants to make a mistake. But if that's the case, we'll never experiment. So fundamentally, the whole idea of being scientists is so much about resilience, and it's a life skill. So talking about that is really important. And then making the case for science-based programs and funding in your community through the company you might work at. So champion to bring STEM tools into these local schools and communities and maker spaces. And there are many corporate and civic organizations that will, be willing to help there. They just need somebody to champion the cause. And then it's just engaging in conversations, anything that draws out someone's natural curiosity, discussing things that seem mundane, but they're anything but, so volunteering, organizing, inspiring, championing, engaging. So that's the voice you have to give to sponsors, teachers, enthusiasts, and mentors. Does that help? Is that too much information?
I agree. It gives us some concrete ways on how we as individuals can participate in this advocacy. I do have a question from the audience, and it says science museums have tried to inspire STEM in youth and adults in an engaging way for decades. Any thoughts on how what they could do to inform STEM education in schools, or what they should do differently?
Yeah, I mean, we applaud, right? I mean, we are one of those communities that have amazing science, museums, and it's not just kids; it's for engaging parents and getting the word out on spending time there with children as a family and things like that. Outside of home, outside of school, I think that supplemental learning is really, really important. The issue there is that many people don't have access to going to the museum. They may not have cars to get there. They may not even know how to go, where to go. I remember there was somebody at 3M who used to volunteer, and they basically said that they have access to schools that want to come for the science fair, but they can't organize for a bus. So actually 3M organized for a bus so their kids could come to the science fair. So these are problems we don't even know or think about. But if you don't have a car, and if your parents are working 2 jobs, how are you even going to get to the museum after hours, or after your school? So I think the key thing there is some of the traveling stuff like we do at 3M, our visiting wizards and things like that, where we try to take a quote unquote a museum to a child and to their classroom. But we're finding with, now this is going to be so hard. And that's exactly why we did the Science at Home series, to have the kids be engaged with simple household materials and doing some of those science experiments. And the other thing I want to point out while we're discussing this is, I'm not saying everybody needs to become a scientist. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is we all need to develop a scientific mindset, and the kids need to develop that. They will just become more critical thinking adults and more open-minded if they just are exposed enough to the scientific process. So I think that's important too, because a lot of people say, well, what if my kid is interested in art? That's great. And art is so much about science these days anyway. So science is all around us. It's not about becoming scientists, but becoming scientifically literate, because without that, there is definitely another have and have-nots going on in society.
Perfect. Jayshree, thank you so much for answering these questions, for giving us the follow-up on these surveys. And I'm encouraged. I am certainly encouraged that science is building its brand, shall we say. So thank you for your time tonight. And if you could go to the next slide. So just to close, thanks for your time and attention here to the audience there. We also want to thank, of course, Dr. Jayshree Seth for speaking with us, for 3M for sponsoring this session, and you can go to the next slide as well. We want to highlight that 3M was a platinum sponsor for this event. ARCS Foundation has spent, as Judy mentioned, many years supporting STEM education. We could still use your help. We would love a donation. I'll just be straight out with you as we continue to support scientists at the University of Minnesota. If you're female, if you're a woman, please consider joining us. People always ask me, like, well, what does that entail? Admittedly, it entails a little bit of money, but not a lot of time unless you have that time. So please, in the follow-up letter, there'll be information on how to join us. Donate if you can. We really appreciate you attending these events, and would also appreciate you spreading the word about ARCS Foundation and the work we do to help build scientists in the U.S. Thanks all very much, and have a great evening.